Ladies and gentlemen, Minister, I have to practice Mrs. Vevilinen, and I did my best. General Secretary Short, ministers, dear colleague Mr. Tiefensee, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here today for this first International Transport Forum meeting. And this is especially also because it takes place in Leipzig. I know that our Transport Minister, Mr. Tiefensee, of course has special ties to Leipzig. As a Lord Mayor, he was involved in shaping many things here. You know what has characterized Leipzig after the German political change and has made Leipzig a modern town also in the political context in Germany. I can report from my experience that I studied physics from 1973 to 78 at the Leipzig University here, and I have an excellent recollection of Leipzig from that time, even if the professors did not always put easy tasks to us. They were quite stringent, and this education was quite tough, but it helps us in today's competition. So Leipzig is a very good choice for the work on this forum. Leipzig has a long tradition as a place for fairs and trade. DHL, a big logistics group, has settled down here, thereby making a contribution to giving further impetus to the development of the air traffic hub here in Leipzig. And this is why it can be found in many places in the world what is going on in the field of traffic, logistics and transport here. Perhaps there are not so many areas where it becomes so clear what globalization means. Globalization which, on the one hand, depends on information exchange and is linked to all corners of the world. The globalization which still involves the task of taking real goods from one point of the world to other points of the world. And this means, of course, that all logistics providers and companies over the past years and 1 or 2 decades have had to totally change. They have to shift, to perform a shift in mindsets. And also the people present here today from the industries have shown what they have successfully managed to do over the past years. I think this forum is so important also because we need a public discussion about what modern international transport systems are characterized by today, because parliaments have to take decisions. People having local responsibility have to make decisions on worldwide hubs. And this is why all of us have to learn anew how transport can be made more efficient, what are its elements, what are the challenges we face, and how can we grow together in a better way. And one thing is clear, in globalization, we're all faced with the question, do we want to be open to the world? Do we want to be involved in fair competition, or do we want to go for fencing ourselves off? And if we selected this fencing off, then we will stay behind, I think. And this is why the trading relations are making progress. This is why we're working for a worldwide fair trading system in the Doha round. This is why we need international transport systems, and we also need thinking about an international system with minimum standards in labor and so on. And this is why the international organizations gain importance, because all this can no longer be regulated just at the national level. And of course, an open world and an open approach also leads to considerable increase in traffic, in transport, and thereby also to new problems, new issues, new tasks and challenges, and also the challenges of networking and integration of the various transport modes. Germany is still, and will hopefully remain so for a while, the world champion in export. So we know that one lives on transport, and 40% of the German export goods today come from imported input services. Vehicles are in part built on other continents, for example, in Brazil, are retrofitted, are then loaded across Europe. Goods are transported over large and ever larger distances, more and more transport services. And this is why I would at first like to congratulate you on the idea of transforming the European Conference of Transport Ministers into an international transport forum. I think thereby the ministers decided in favor of wanting to face up to the challenges, not just limiting themselves to Europe, but by being very open to the world. A routine meeting of government officials is now becoming a global platform on questions of mobility, transport and logistics. And I can wish you great success in doing this. Germany will do everything to provide the support on this way to make it successful. Also, there will then be the opportunity to discuss this with representatives of politics, the business sector and the academic circles, to use this platform for an exchange. And the need of information, but also the many aspects which have to be dealt with in this discussion, are immense. And this is why over the next few years you will have a lot of work to do. The forecasts say that in the next 15 years, goods transport alone is said to increase by more than 2/3. It is we will be faced with another set of new challenges, and we know that with these developments, if they are controlled and steered in the right way, additional economic growth and more employment can be generated. Also, more people will have a chance in taking part in this growth and in these developments. But we shouldn't mince our words, and you have heard presentations this morning about this. This also involves great challenges to man and the environment. And to bring all this together, also in thinking, to go the most efficient way, this is one of the biggest challenges which are also necessary for the acceptance of being open, and if it is successful, or this will cause questions which lead to conflicts which we are not successful, if we're not successful. I'm firmly convinced that modern industrial societies and knowledge societies cannot develop without reasonable transport systems. This is why there is generally a positive support for transport, but it also shows what has changed. It asks that such a forum puts climate change on the top of its agenda. As an environment minister, I would have dreamed of this being the first special subject of an international transport forum, and that this is something that goes without saying, that this is discussed by you. This is something I'm very pleased about, and it shows how or what perspective we have to have of this overall problem. Climate change is certainly one of the central challenges to mankind. It faces us with a moral challenge, namely to work on the conditions of life of the future generations and to always have them on our mind. It's interesting that this International Transport Forum takes place at the same time like the UN Conference about Biodiversity. Another aspect of maintaining our natural basis of life, of course, and we have to be able, in a world where the number of people is growing and where the scarcity and finite nature of resources is becoming ever more visible, we must find a way to get to a sustainable way of life. This is a bit easier to say, to pronounce from the perspective of the industrial nations than from the perspective of those who are still developing to secure a dignified life for everyone. This is why this problem is not just a technical one, but at first we need to be clear about the moral basis, and from my viewpoint this can only mean that we give every human being the same chance for development in this world, with all the consequences this has. With regard to climate change, it's no use, interestingly, and this is why this is such a thrilling global theme for me, to look back and put the blame on people. In past periods of time, yes, it's true, the industrial countries, of course, did cause the CO2 emissions of the past 100 or 150 years. But was it also, even if all industrial countries overnight capped or stopped their CO2, if they didn't emit any CO2 anymore, then the problem would still be here. And also would have to be taken seriously by the developing countries. It is we only can do it together. We shouldn't look back and scold each other for things that happened in the past. So it's a moral challenge, it's an economic challenge, it's also a challenge for our abilities of opening a new chapter in our economic development, and of course to open a chapter that places us in front of totally new challenges at a time where we see considerable changes in the availability and affordability of classical energies against the background of rising oil prices. And it's also a huge political challenge because we are faced with the task of cooperating internationally. It's the classical path of a multilateral process, and this is why I set great store by when we were the host for the G8 summit, by saying that this has to happen under the umbrella of the United Nations. There is no other political alternative. It's not possible that 5 countries just talk with another 5 countries, but there must be an internationally legitimized and binding process that has to be initiated. Now, what is the dimension of this problem? From 1970 to 2004, the man-made greenhouse gas emissions increased by 70%, and this increase has not slowed down over the past years, but it accelerated, and we now feel the consequences. And this is the actual difficult thing about this whole process of climate change. The consequences are felt at points. They are felt differently in the regions. You can find different patterns of explanation for them. They cannot be proven in individual cases on the basis of a certain summer or a certain winter, but everything we see indicates, and Mr. Pachauri has also said that man-made climate change is dramatic. And their consequences are dramatic, and that we have to counter them. Now, there's the discussion, there has always been a climate change. Yes, that's true. There have also been fluctuations by many degrees centigrade, but at the time when the Earth was not having so many people on it. And climate change is today not taking within tens of thousands of years, but it takes place in a very short time, where no adaptation mechanisms will come into play which prepare or make us appear prepared. And then it has never been the case that all points in the world have been settled by people, like mouths of rivers and so on. It is, we have to face up to climate change. It's not about the question, do I have to spend more today than yesterday, but it's about the question, what would I have to spend if I don't do anything in comparison with a reasonable approach? I can't say it often enough, because the political discussion at the moment is very difficult. If the oil price rises, when the energies become more expensive, then the people ask us, of course, why do we have to pay subsidies for the development of solar energy, wind energy, according to the Renewable Energies Act? Do we have to accept that? Is that proper? Is that reasonable? When we talk about vehicle taxes, something which is particularly topical for us in Germany, then the question is, those who have older cars, can we put another burden on them? And this question finds very different answers in the political space. And this is why, in the long run, even if we don't manage so quickly as we have thought, we can't go without setting the right incentives. If we want the changeover to biofuels, and we will do it in Germany, then we suddenly see the problem that the technical compatibility with the classical gasoline types when blending in biofuels is not as we wanted, and people with older cars have to buy more expensive fuel. We have to discuss that, but this shouldn't be a reason for not looking into biofuels. And this is why I'm very grateful to the report of Professor Stone of the London School of Economics. He showed us for the first time what the economic scenarios are if we don't do anything and if we do something. And only this can be the basis of our action. And this is why we have to, and we will, and for me it's not an issue or a question, take the IPCC reports seriously. And this is why we should do everything to not have the mean temperature increase exceed 2 degrees centigrade. To achieve this, however, is a very ambitious task in the face of the growth rates you, for example, face in the transport sector, because we today see an average emission. In Europe, for example, we have an average emission of 11 tons. And the world average about 8 tons per person in the world. And even if the world population increase is not rolled in, we need to get to 4 tons until the middle of the century if we want to achieve this 2 degrees centigrade. Germany, like I said, 11, Europe 9 tons, America 20 tons per capita. So this is a huge task we are facing. And we also see that countries like China today are above 3 tons per capita. So against the background of growth rates, a reduction has to be tackled very quickly. So this is why we need to check what action we can take.
I think this is nothing new to you. If I say climate change means to be prepared to opt for new ways for economic development. And I think in the Federal Republic of Germany we can offer an interesting way out, and that this also entails many interesting chances. This is the second aspect. If the industrialized countries have caused the climatic change, it is again an economic but also a moral obligation to develop the best technology so as to make the best contributions for others as well, to start with the best technologies right from the start. If we look around, where is our future for Europeans? Or, for instance, for the United States of America? As industrialized nations, we do know that our chances to produce efficiently in the well-known sectors do not grow. So it is a win-win situation if we decide to invest on more efficient structures and research and development in order to offer better chances for export opportunities and employment. If you look around, the solar industry and other renewables will know this. We have a European strategy on climate protection, as you know, and we have pledged in international negotiations for the time after the Kyoto Agreement to aspire clear reductions in the European Union, 20% as compared to 1990. Provided that others follow us internationally, we are prepared to continue with reductions down to 30%. The proportion of renewables of the total energy consumption is to be increased, and the whole energy efficiency is to be increased by 20%. So we have a lot of work to do up to next year. Next year, in 2009, we'll start in Denmark. A follow-up agreement is due, and we have to develop yardsticks for this. In long term, we can only be successful with per capita emissions, I believe. That's why the development of the latest state-of-the-art technologies must be continued, and we as industrialized states have to contribute our share. How do the various economic players contribute? Yesterday at the conference on protection of species, I said that the capacity of absorption of tropical rainforests and moors are still larger than all CO2 emissions from the transport sector. That means biodiversity is an essential prerequisite for climate protection. I shouldn't tell you this today because you might conclude it's not too bad about transport, but I'm just trying to tell you where we have to make adjustments here and there in order to achieve a balanced situation. But of course, we also have to do much in the field of transport. 71% of the total transport volume in the EU depend on mineral oil today. On the road traffic, it's 97% even, and therefore transport contributes a lot to the depletion of energy resources, and to a large extent it is responsible for the CO2 emissions in the OECD states. It accounts for 30% on average. Worldwide, 56 million, we have 650 million cars, and the tendency is increasing. In the emerging countries, the fleet will be doubled up to 2020 to 2050. It will be tripled. That's why we will develop new technologies, because we will not have the moral possibility to tell others, you have to change or you will not get anything, unless we are prepared to contribute ourselves. We have essential growth rates in the freight transport, aviation, maritime transportation. The protagonists are here present in the hall. Politicians have a lot of work to do. I also attended the International Aviation exhibition, which I opened. And our transport minister knows it yourself. The single European sky, the single market on the soil is working, but in the air, we still have a number of many little states and regulations costing a lot of CO2 emission. Having a concentrated forum like this, and thinking how difficult it is, it should be possible if we really are courageous enough to start acting. Well, obviously there's no applause. We have to make it possible to decouple transport services from energy consumption. That would be one essential point we would achieve in the industrial sector, and that's what we have achieved some years ago. We have not yet managed to bring about this decoupling. In Germany, economic growth is still dependent on the consumption of land. Every day we use up 100 hectares of new land every day, and we have not yet achieved to decouple transport services from the energy consumption. This will be one of the most essential challenges. Therefore, energy efficiency must be improved. It pleases me to hear what's happening in the automotive industry in the last few years. When I was Minister for the Environment 10 years ago, I was told that more safety is needed now. The cars will be heavier with more safety, and then they cannot consume less CO2, or at least it would be difficult. Now, the discussion has changed entirely. New propulsion technologies have been developed. What was looked down upon with the Japanese cars is now trendy in Germany. The run for the best battery has become a question of honor now. I like this very much indeed, and it demonstrates when certain incentives are offered, when needs are pressing enough, there are ways out. And I do believe fuel cells and solar systems will bring about unbelievable revolutions in the transport sector. That's why we will have to make sure not to conduct a punctual, a limited discussion. Germany, it's the speed limit, for example, believing to have solved all problems of transport development. So we should not concentrate on side battlefields, but we should view holistic scenarios where political and industrial representatives has to do one's homework, as I mentioned the example of the single European sky, but also for the innovation rate for aircraft and the testing of novel technologies. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to take concerted actions. We have to make an effort within the European Union. We now have a debate about the cars and the question how we can achieve to reduce the fleet to 120 grams to 2012. As Germans, we are in a difficult situation with the European Commission, since Germany is a country where many cars are produced, especially cars of all size categories. A regulation 120 grams per kilometer was a regulation the automotive industry once pledged voluntarily. It might have been easier to comply with this. Then today it would not be necessary to take regulatory measures and to threaten with penalties. But when we now take regulatory measures, this has to be based on a competition-neutral platform. And this ranges from the aircraft, the car, and the lorry, the trucks that will keep us busy again and again. What does it mean, sustainable development? We've learned it means to bring about a harmony, an accordance of ecological needs, economic needs, and social necessities. So, in the debate of the automotive regulation in the EU shows you how regulatory law means for the issue of sustainability. Some say you cannot integrate social components in a regulation that is about the consumption of fuels. Others say you cannot minimize European export chances by making things harder for big cars. So that's why we have to find a balanced path. I'm thankful that the European automotive industry, also those making bigger cars, say, okay, we are prepared and willing to make a bigger contribution. But on the other hand, I can only say if the manufacturers of bigger cars would be forced, it would be exactly the wrong thing, because we have realized that innovations in small cars have also been transferred to all types of cars to make new solutions affordable. And we are also confronted with a fundamental question of climate protection. Do we want to impose regulations on all sectors, the automotive industry, the railway, the aviation, or do we not prefer to offer market incentives, hoping that the market participants will behave reasonably? I don't believe that the politicians are predestined to regulate everything, ranging from the cooker or the chemistry plant. That's why I hope for market instruments. So the instrument of CO2 emission trade is the very tool which, from the basis of my current knowledge, offers the best conditions for a global application. I think it stands to reason that we should always remember where we want to go so that our global system is not damaged too much, that when we select the sub-solutions to lose our way or to waste our efforts. That is why it is so important, ladies and gentlemen, that you debate all these issues among yourselves. And let me add one more aspect of the transport problem, which has developed into a global issue. That's the biofuels and admixtures. Here again, for some time, the impression was biofuels, so to speak, it could be the panacea in all the transport sector to become independent. But as the perpetuum mobile will not exist, there will not be the one and only solution. There is no free lunch in this world. This is a saying which also fits to the biofuels. There are always negative sides implied in all the solutions as well. So we can develop a new strategy that can be a global strategy only. When I visited Brazil recently, I realized, and I will pass this knowledge to anybody else, that there is no direct connection between sugarcane cultivation and the rainforest situation. But we have to remember the competition situation with soybeans and maize and rice. And when you remember developing countries like India, Mexico, and others, in their neighborhood, sales have gone up from one year to the next without responding with a cultivation strategy, leading to price distortions, giving rise to considerable destabilizations. That's why I would like to ask the OECD and other organizations to support us, the politicians, and to offer long-term scenarios about available arable land or food habits to be expected. If you remember the population of India, 500 million, what it means when they eat twice a day, it would mean to redouble the food supply. And if you triple the biofuel production, it will inevitably lead you into a conflict. So we have to develop standards for biofuels, ensuring their sustainable origin, and the second generation biofuels have to be developed, offering more leeway, as it was the case with the current technology. And then the biofuels are just one aspect of a climate protection strategy and of sustainable development in transport systems, but they will not refrain us from further developing in new infrastructures, public means of transport, energy efficiency, modern transport control system, reasonable logistic systems. And as we have seen, when we introduced a toll system, efficiency is possible. So we are facing a real global and intriguing and diverse challenge. I believe that the questions of peaceful development, development free of conflicts, will essentially be decided at this interface of economics and ecology and social conditions in the next decades to come. You, as ministers of transport, are responsible. You account for 1/3. That is what's in your hands. Whether or not you will find interesting solutions will be decided whether the IPCC will be able to say how bad the climate data have gone, but also that people have started to change their ways of life, their behavior. I deem this to be possible. I think this is the interesting and most exciting question of the 21st century. Also, this includes the question whether a dignified life can be ensured for the people all over the world. And therefore, I wish you the necessary seriousness to have your discussions, but also to enjoy the discussions. If, say, in 100 or 200 years' time, the people will stroll along Leipzig streets or in Berlin or in Dresden, talking about what we did at the beginning of the 21st century or what we failed to do, it is well enough to have rebuilt churches that were formerly destroyed, but I also would wish that our century will be a century that has made a contribution for mankind. And in this spirit, I'd like to encourage you to work on with joy and elan. I'd like to support you, like many heads of states of the countries being present here. I think in Europe we have recognized our responsibility.